travelers along the path of the beam. I am known on this level of the tower as Jaime and Fuego, and if it please you, join me here in front of this tower of books for Hail to Stephen Kissing. Yes, that's right, and this is palaver that we get to share twice a week, once every terrifying Tuesday, usually, and once every scarific Saturday. But since we were doing an interview this week with the star of none other than Terrifier, yes, that's right, the guy who plays Art the Clown, David, who was super cool, met him at Mad Monster, and he was gracious enough to do an interview with Cecil. Between you and me, I didn't really like Terrifier very much, but that's why I wasn't a part of that process. And so if you were down with that particular clown, make sure to go and check out the very lengthy and comprehensive, discussion that my dude Cecil had with the actor who plays Art the Clown. But without further ado, we are actually jumping back to a segment that I have not touched upon since we crushed the threshold into, past the 100th episode and into these triple digits, y'all. So that is a ongoing film series that I have been doing called Films That Forgot the Face of Their Father. Yes, obviously that's a tower reference because I'm a tower junkie, hashtag tower junkie through and through. But it's been interesting with the amount of just detest and hatred, I guess, that I was positive I was going to feel for the predominance of these films that I previously covered. And in that case, we're talking A Return to Salem's Lot, we're talking the two sequels to Sometimes They Come Back, we're talking The Rage Carrie 2, which honestly, the more I really think about it, I love The Rage Carrie 2. That's a damn good movie. I'm probably going to end up buying that at some point. But, so, in a very similar vein, and if I remember correctly, coming out shortly thereafter, like right around the time, within just a couple of years, we have the direct-to-television sequel to Firestarter. Yes, Firestarter was one of those early, well, I guess it was mid-80s because, it was 85? Boy, don't tear me to pieces if that's not the case. I'm pretty sure it was 1985. But, so, yeah, in 2002, that was the one thing I didn't write here on my notes, like a goofy movie. But, so in 2002, they basically got the idea to do a two-part, like, mini-series type thing. So it was like 4 hours on television, if you include the commercials and whatnot, around 3 hours on the home release. And so, put together by the USA Cable Network, but put on the Sci-Fi Channel in those two different parts. 2002's Firestarter 2, otherwise known as Firestarter Rekindled, and on some releases you see it called Firestarter 2 Rekindled, and so on. So in this you find a grown-up Charlie, basically still on the run, so to speak, but in hiding, and she's grown up and is, ironically enough of all things, working back at the same school, the same college, or university I should specify, where her parents had those initial experiments done on themselves that killed all those different people, and that, the two of them somehow survived and had her and brought about her, her powers of pyrokinesis and stuff like that. So I'm just gonna essentially start first and foremost by saying Firestarter is not one of my favorite Stephen King books. I don't even think I would say it cracks the top 20. It does not. It's got some interesting concepts of psychedelia and of just the aspect of it really, in comparison with CARRIE and with, the whole, shinning stuff in the stuff at the Overlook and whatnot, it kind of at least veered into a different direction and took a peek at it from a more, from more of an outlook of scientific explanation and theory and things like that, and, dormant psychic abilities and stuff like that being able to be awakened and stuff. I would say the most endearing thing definitely for me is not the half-baked science in Firestarter, but for me it's most definitely the relationship between Charlie and her father. And that was one of the few things in the original Firestarter movie from the 80s that I must say I thought was done pretty damn well. I felt the genuine love, the connection, the acting from the father in that one was quite good, I thought. And, obviously Drew Barrymore gives a very nice performance. I'm pretty sure that was like a year or two after E.T. or within a year or so. Anyway, don't quote me for that, but she was becoming a bigger star, and she would only, you know, get bigger and bigger and bigger until she started hoeing it up with stuff like Poison Ivy. But nonetheless, yeah, I enjoy the first Firestarter for what it is, but I don't like the soundtrack very much. I'm trying to remember if it was, it wasn't Oingo Boingo, or maybe it was. Anyway, soundtrack, just okay. The whole vibe of it is where King adaptations were starting to get a little on the silly side for me, and we see this, I can't remember if Cat's Eye was before this or after this, but I know that was also like right around this point. And so, I don't know, King in the 80s, with the exception of a few things specifically, like, you know, near the tail end with Pet Sematary, I think some of Christine, obviously, being, you know, more on the serious side of things. Cujo, pretty good. But yes, as the decade wore on and we got into like the Maximum Overdrive time and stuff like that, that's where I feel like King was venturing very, very trepidatiously into self-parody. And this one was right on the edge, especially with the miscasting of Patton, you know, George C. Scott in This Is Rainbird. You know, recast a Native American guy. This is like some of the first, one of the first, at least not one of the first, but one of the first in like horror, as I was like coming of age and really understanding like drastic changes that made Donuts for sense for me. Donuts for sense, turning, you know, this very sublime and kind of honestly like a guy who gave me vibes of, you know, the Native American dude who ended up escaping in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but yet never ended up in the Clank, in the insane asylum and stuff like that, and just kept, you know, going on. And so maybe that's a really bad analogy. I don't know, but that was the vibe, at least when I was reading Firestarter, that I got from Rainbird, where he was smart and he was insane, and yet, you know, I don't know, but a big lurking presence as well. And so that was miscasting that I had big time problems with, and still do to this day. I know Andrew on the Hail group said that he didn't really mind it so much, but I don't know. At the end of the day, it's one of those mid-80s King selections that just doesn't do it for me. Even though I just purchased the collector's edition, I'm trying to remember if it's from Scream Factory or you know, Twilight Time. It's from one of those, but even watching the bonus features, and ironically, Drew Barrymore did not participate in the supplemental material on that release. So the 4K, you know, whatever new badass, you know, version of the picture and stuff looks cool, I guess. I don't know. Once again, the biggest thing for me is the father-daughter relationship, which is done very, very well, very endearingly and very heartbreakingly in that story. And spoilers, if you haven't heard, that in the first Firestarter, her mom gets killed at the beginning, and then, you know, as the film nears its close, her father does as well, and that's what sets her on this big, just where, after trying to repress her powers for so long, you know, Charlie decides to just embrace and start just, Pookie, let's burn this motherfucker down! Pookie, let's burn this motherfucker down! And that's exactly what happens. This, you know, this facility that the shop has together, which is kind of a King thing that was blatantly ripped off by Stranger Things. Essentially, well, you see it in Golden Years, you see it in, you know, well, you hear about it in The Mist, if I remember correctly, a few other King stories, but it's like this super secretive government agency that's doing massive amounts of experiments with everything from, you know, testing for, you know, telekinetic powers and stuff in people, to trying to open up portals to other dimensions where there's thinnies and stuff like that. So, Double Down, I don't really particularly care for the book or for the movie. The book is much better, obviously, because it's a Psy-King book, but it's just, this is an apples to oranges thing. I have a lot of friends and a lot of fellow constant readers that love both the adaptation and then really, really love the book. And the book I'm planning to give a reread on for the channel here at some particular point. But yeah, so I give all of this background just to give some context into the fact that now you have Charlie all grown up, and it is none other than Marguerite Moreau, I always think of her from the Mighty Ducks because I was like the same age at the time, but you know, she's one of the babes in Wet Hot American Summer that Paul Rudd has the thing going on with. Oh man, just her whole thing with Showalter's character in that particular movie, where you know he tries to charm her, and if you haven't seen Wet Hot American Summer, I can't necessarily recommend, you know, the First Day of Camp or, you know, the Return little series stuff on Netflix, but that original movie, it's not for everybody. I still remember the absolute hatred I've had from, you know, like previous girls I dated like 15 years ago when that movie came out, or from friends who just don't get the humor. It's not for them. The Stella guys are not for everybody. They're really not. David Wayne, you know, Michael Ian Black, I want to say. Might be wrong there. And then obviously Michael Showalter. But they're all, it's really just beat you over the head until your head is numb. And then, I don't know. I love Wet Hot. Anyway, Marguerite is very pretty in that, and she's done, you know, various other things, you know, beyond the two properties that I mentioned. But she's in both Wet Hot and in the Mighty Ducks films. And so she's the grown-up Charlie. She's the one who's hiding out at, very strangely, the university where all those experiments were initially conducted. But then they bring on this dude, Tucci, something like that. I don't know. You've seen him as a supporting player on like Titanic, the Titanic movie. I want to say he was like in The Rock, and you know, a few other like 90s action movies. But so he essentially plays this. He's almost like an insurance investigator kind of guy. So speed up to 2002, and all of the different families of the people who like passed away in those lot 6 experiments, I want to say. I think it was lot 6. I could be wrong. And I just watched this last night, which is the sad thing. But yeah, so in all of these particular experiments that they did, there was class action lawsuits after, you know, because obviously the family members knew that, okay, they're going and they're taking part in these series of, you know, experimental drugs and things like that. And pretty much everybody dies except for like 4 of them. And so, you know, a couple decades later, a couple class action lawsuits later, presumably, there are all of these bits of money being sent out and given to, you know, both, you know, surviving members of the connected families, and then they're trying to track down what this guy's, boy, I'm trying to remember his name. I want to say Vince. Yes. So Vince's role is basically to try to track down these 4 people who are presumably still alive, you know, that they can't seem to find, and, you know, make sure that they get their well-deserved, you know, earnings and compensation for all the pain, the heartache, the trauma, and, you know, just lingering, you know, stuff that they are obviously, or at least presumably, still going through. And lo and behold, he is trying to track down Charlie's father and ends up stumbling upon Charlie herself. And even though, like, it makes it seem like he doesn't know who she is at first, you kind of get the vibe, but we always try to give overall impressions, and then we go into story and acting and all of those fun things here, not just on Hail to Stephen King, but the horror show in general. And you see the smile that's forming on my face because I didn't hate this movie, but very similar to my experience with pretty much... Okay, I wouldn't put The Rage Carrie 2 into this sector because that's maybe my favorite of all the films that forgot the face of their fathers, this series that I've been doing. But this is along the lines of like the second Sometimes They Come Back. So not the second sequel, but the, you know, Sometimes They Come Back Again. And then probably Return to Salem's Lot. Because both of those, while they were silly and hammy at times, they had enough really novel ideas of like just universe expansion and intriguing qualities, entertaining performances, stuff like that. Vince, the guy from the aforementioned action films and whatnot, is not one of the entertaining performances. He's one of the bad parts. But I'll get into that in the acting and everything. But as far as an overall impression, it's long in the tooth because it is a mini-series, you know, albeit very similar to Bag of Bones, which was done a few years later. It's a 2-part mini-series, you know, so they just, as opposed to condensing it into just a theatrical or, you know, home release kind of thing, which eventually did see home release, but they didn't keep it in the, you know, 140, you know, 2-hour range. They decided to try to give this thing that's not even based on a book, you know, some time to breathe. And I think that's because they had some star power behind it. You've got Malcolm McDowell playing a surviving Rainbird. You've got Dennis Hopper playing a, his name's Robinson, if I remember correctly. And he's somebody who was involved in the initial experiments that survived. I honestly, since it's been a little while since I watched the original Firestarter, I don't know if he was ever mentioned in either the source material or in the film itself. And yeah, with names like those involved, I mean, I guess you can see why they would be willing to give the project a little bit more time and, you know, I guess not try to condense it too much and let it develop and stuff like that. Especially with, you know, once again, I know there's a lot of people who really dig Firestarter, and it's one of those earlier King books that, you know, they hold like near and dear and whatnot. But so yeah, overall impressions, it's silly at times, especially when it gets into this subplot of Rainbird survived, okay, now played by Malcolm McDowell, and the shop is no more, presumably, but he's still trying to track down, you know, Charlie and the other surviving members of the experiments that didn't pass away. But he has this new, like, lot 23, because apparently they continued testing, and he was a part of that process. So he's up to lot 23, and he has these kids who they're basically like these little X-Men kids, and he's got this troop of boys that he has just kept in hiding and in training, and, you know, they all have different powers and stuff. There's one that is they're all like little X-kids, you know, but little evil Hellfire Club X-kids and stuff. And, you know, he's like Magneto, which is even funnier being a British guy and whatnot. And this is 2002, no less, and so this is a couple years after the X-Men movie came out. And it was widely popular and praised and stuff. So it makes me wonder if this was incorporated in as a plot point very deliberately, you know, just for that reason. But there's a kid like Banshee with like a hell scream. I think that's an X-Men with a hell scream. There's a dude like Morph who like just, you know, or like Jean, for instance, you know, who just absorbs the powers of those around her and stuff. And so I don't know, the kids are all pretty terrible in this movie. The acting is not good, they're not written well, but when the story focuses on, you know, Charlie specifically, and like the scenes with her and you know, McDowell are actually, you know, Marguerite and him have very solid chemistry, and it's kind of interesting to see a meeting, you know, all these years later, and the fact that he still like loves her and cares about her in this crazy, creepy way, which, you know, you did get that vibe from, you know, George C. Scott, maybe even more so than you did in the book. Whereas in the book, I feel like Rainbird was portrayed more so as manipulative, whereas in the film version, you did feel that slight more sense that there was a trickle of care there, kind of thing. But so yeah, it's long in the tooth, it's got a lot of silly ideas and stuff in it, but as a whole, especially with some decent effects here and there and like lots of fire, and they didn't totally skimp on the budget, it's not bare bones BS. I had fun with this, and if you like Firestarter, I definitely think you should check this out. So once again, a little bit of additional information about the story. The way this Vince insurance adjuster, compensation, whatever dude gets in touch with Charlie in the first place is he goes to the university where these checks are allegedly being picked up, and he's trying to, you know, get the mass settlement there. And she's working in the library, but she's doing that because all of the shop experimental things have become public record, and so she's kind of trying to figure more out herself. She wants to cure herself. That's probably not going to be happening, but nonetheless, I'm not here to spoil anything. She gets on a solid track and does find somebody who gives her some big time answers and helps change her, without spoiling too much, in a few different ways. But so their paths cross. He's trying to do research and, you know, just go down the lifeline. Everybody thinks Charlie's dead. You know, she's listed as deceased. And, yeah, so the two of them, he ends up finding out who she is, and they hook up and whatnot. And not hook up, but, you know, they get together and start teaming up to, you know, gain more information. He starts wondering, you know, is there possible nefarious intentions behind the company that I work for? How legit is the work that I'm doing? Why are they trying to track these people down? Who could they possibly be? And that's really as much as I can say beyond, mentioning the aforementioned ex-kids and the fact that evil ex-kids, the ones that Rainbird has been training. The fact that we get this Dennis Hopper character who was friends with her parents and was in the same experimental group. There's a lot of hammy, stupid subplots, and there's some bad... They slightly alter some dates and some history. There's too many coincidental meetups. That's as I refer to my notes, as opposed to just talking off the top of my head. Man, there's some bad dialogue too. Like, there's this scene where the Vince guy's like, "Come on, I'll buy you a cheeseburger," and I just laughed my ass off. There's also, for me, there's too much sex in this. Yeah, sex is great, hooking up, blah blah, awesomeness, but it just felt like. It felt unnecessary to the plot. There's one hookup and stuff, and it's funny, but you kind of get the vibe that Charlie's a little bit of I don't know, getting around in the slightest degree. It's all based on a club scene where she goes and hooks up at it's like very, very beginning of the movie, mind you, and she takes this guy, that she just meets in the club, and they go out to the alley, and they're hardcore, max session and ripping clothes off and just licking each other all over, and it's great. It's pretty hot. But then she's about to get down on the get down, and then she gets upset and is she's starting to burn things, and then she's about to run away, but she's known this guy for a couple minutes, so I don't know. It's something that just kind of bothered me, because I was like, oh, our sweet girl, she's all grossed up, and she's kind of crazy. And then there's lots of really bad stuff with the kids that are almost laughable with Rainbird. There's one scene where he's like, "Come round, children, let me tell you the story of Charlie McGee," blah, 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 blah. Rainbird still being white. Although, I must say, I really like Malcolm McDowell in this role, and that's where it's easy segueing into acting. But, oh man... Another scene I have to mention is the fact that they're about at the halfway point when they're going to do the bridge from part 1 to part 2. There is this scene in this town, where the bad guys have tracked down our hero duo, Vince and Charlie, and for literally over 5 minutes, no dialogue. There's just running. And they go down one alley and they see these guys again. And there's more running, and then there's more running, and then that's one of the few, bits where there's some bad CGI is about the halfway through point. But acting, though, is where I can definitely say, Malcolm McDowell steals the movie, miniseries, whatever you want to call it for me. He's good in it. He's actually quite good, and I bought him a lot as this particular character. Maybe not as accurate, compared to the source material. Maybe even less accurate than, the fact that, at least George C. Scott, I think slightly darker in complexion, and he had the hair going and whatnot, which is, I mean, come on, I have so many of my native homies, and, we're all about metal and stuff, and so, he didn't really look the part as much as that, but I felt like the change made a little bit more sense here, especially the transition of the character and stuff, and he's got, the half burned up face and everything, which I'll talk about once we get to the effects, and he has a particular scene at the very end of the movie where he's quoting, and he's reciting this poem, and it shows the guy has, he's British. Hello, I'm a British person, on that South Park episode about Pip. But, he gives this great monologue, and it's kind of they're doing some flashing to different scenes and stuff like that, and it's almost like a little montage monologue kind of thing. But it's maybe one of the best written things in the entire movie, and as far as acting and the delivery of the wording and everything, he does it tremendously. Marguerite, our Mighty Ducks girl, she's good in most of it, but there is the occasional scene where I think more so she was just written poorly, and so there's not a lot that she can do with bad dialogue, but her mannerisms, her tortured nature, the fact that with the exception of the early scene that I told you just kind of bummed me out, where I'm like, oh, she's grown up into this, that's kind of sad. And yet maybe that was supposed to be effective, she's got all of this repressed you know, just sexual frustration from not being able to be in a relationship and actually like hook up or do anything like that. And so it comes out in these bursts of like fiery passion. Maybe this is making sense now that I'm talking about it. But, you know, when she walks away from him in that scene, then she gets kind of foreboding and a little bad CGI glow going down and stuff. And like she starts lighting everything on fire, yeah, as she's walking through the alley. It's actually some of the better effects in the film. I gotta say, good practical, little bit of CGI enhancement. And then also I mentioned Dennis Hopper. You know, he's not in a ton of it. You know, he's definitely back billing for a reason, but he's good. He's good, and he's got great interplay in the scenes that he has with Ms. Moreau. You know, with our adult Charlie and stuff. So. Everybody else, though, is either serviceable enough, like most of the like bad bigwig guys and stuff, although some of them aren't too bad, but then there's other ones like, you know, some of the extras, you know, who have like a line or two, like the cop or the brother of the Vince character. Oh, it's so awful talking about, the men in black and come get me and stuff, but once again, I do feel like there was remnants of that goofy tone that I was saying hit King stuff in the mid to late 80s and then unfortunately plagued certain projects in the 90s, and this is at the point where King was kind of, unless you were a Dark Tower fan, you know, and you were reading the end of that series, you probably thought, if you were like general audience, that a lot of King adaptations just were not very good around this time. So if we're gonna just segue around into effects and stuff, there's some really solid town destruction in the finale, although it does really rip off CARRIE a lot, in my estimation. You know, most of the time when they use practical fire, it is of a bigger and more grandiose variety than we saw in the original Firestarter, and I think it's more convincing and stuff. It's where we have these X-Men battle type craziness, you know, with Charlie almost like being a dark phoenix of sorts, you know, going against these evil little Hellfire children that Magneto Rainbird has put together. That's where it just, I don't know, man. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't look very good, but they did go with big set design for this town's destruction and stuff like that. If it was a soundstage, it was a huge soundstage, but with the amount of explosives and pyro and practical pyro, which is where I have to give them, you know, some legit, you know, just props and stuff like that for going for the legit pyro and for not skimping on the effects. And unfortunately, the CGI, when it's blended, it looks pretty good as just an enhancer. It's where it's just sticking out like a sore thumb by itself that it feels dated. But bottom line, there really is a lot to appreciate about this. There's nothing music-wise. There's no, you know, like callbacks. And they do refilm a lot of those scenes with Charlie and Rainbird for like those who maybe were not totally initiated with the original film and stuff. So this is actually one that honestly, even if you haven't watched the original Firestarter, you could probably just sit down and watch this and get enough context, you know, with all the flashbacks that they recreate and stuff. And they're not recreated as well, with the exception of the stuff with Malcolm McDowell. And I do, the young girl that they have stand in for the Drew Barrymore stuff as the youngster, she's not as good. You know, she doesn't have that ultimately endearing quality and look like Drew did, you know, at that age, but she's still good. She's still good. So, once again, I thought I was gonna hate this film, and I'm just waiting for one at this point that I just absolutely despise. The one that I think came close enough, but then it redeemed itself with little bits and pieces here at the end, you know, was the Sometimes They Come Back for More. That's the worst of this series of coverage that I've done, but I don't know, for those who like the original stories that they're based on, there's enough to chew on, enough interesting idea here that I can't say avoid it. I totally can't. If you like Firestarter, you need to at least give this 4-hour mini-series of wackiness, you know, that is condensed down to around 3 once it's on home release. Unfortunately, it's not available on any VODs or any streaming services. I had to physically track this down out of print and purchase it, but you know, it's nice to have it on my shelf and on my collection as far as being the King completist goes. I'm not the King completist with the sequels, you know, especially these VOD direct-to-video sequels and stuff that we had so many of over the years, but this is one that I would say watch, make up your own mind. Firestarter Rekindled, I found enough enjoyment in it not to say, you know, burn the hell out of it or whatever, you know, it's gonna burn your eyes and you'll be done for. But it's really got some ash in it. Speaking of which, there's one scene in the very, very end with Rainbird and with Charlie. It's very Sonya Blade. Yeah, that's probably kind of a spoiler, but it's actually entertaining, man. I actually quite liked it. So I'm going to leave it at that and extend a grande gracias, as I always do here on Hail to Stephen King, to the Katet and to everybody who is checking out this particular video, even if you're not the biggest Firestarter fan, even if you haven't seen this movie. If you've seen this film, the very few who probably have, let me know in the comments below what you think, or if you're a member of the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group, or if you're not, you know, jump on. I'm the sole admin, and we talk all things Stephen King. We do Tower Tuesdays, we do Pennywise Wednesdays. There's just all kinds of different updates about the show here. If you want to stay more in the loop of what's going on with upcoming episodes, you know, interact with all of the other viewers. We have like 300 people on there almost now, and it's a very closely knit, you know, just group. There's definite Kef here, and it's really exciting and humbling to see how things have grown in the last few months since really getting that thing going. If you haven't subscribed here to the horror show, we don't just do Stephen King coverage, obviously. That's just me, you know, doing my own thing. But we do 2, sometimes 3 episodes a day of reviews, trailer reactions, convention coverage, unboxings, let's plays, just so many different things. A true horror variety show. Here in the coming weeks, maybe months and stuff, we have a very exciting new collaborative thing that it looks like we might be on the verge of nailing down, which we are very pumped about. We had an exciting meeting just this past week, Cecil and myself, so that's fun. Yeah, so hit the subscription, hit the bell so you get all the notifications about new episodes here on the horror show. By the time you watch this, we'll probably have crossed 23,000 subscribers. We've been doing this for over 4 years now, and when I first joined the show, we were at a couple hundred, and it had been going for, boy, close to a year already at that point, as far as like, you know, as a channel when I joined during season 2. And so, once again, we just cannot thank all of you who support this program and everything that the horror show does for all that you do for us and the support that you give us. It's a blessing. It's badass. And so I've been Jaime and Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, where you can catch all of the old Fuegotainment episodes before there just might be something new debuting this weekend. So stay tuned, and until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, sin amigos. I hope we get to reconnect sooner rather than later, and until that bad ice instant transpires, remember, stay scared. And in this case, read Stephen King's Firestarter, and maybe it'll better give you a little context about this silly but enjoyable film.